All right, everybody. Thank you for being here. If you're joining in late or if you're just tuning in because I recorded this and you're watching it later, that's why we recorded it. I know it's kind of last minute throwing out this topic to everyone. However, I wanted to make sure we covered this as soon as possible. So I appreciate your patience. Typically in the contracts class, we have them mapped out where the first 3 weeks of the month on Mondays are basically buyers, sellers, and then the purchase and sale. And then the last Monday of the month, we kind of have a free-for-all. So it worked out well to have a free-for-all. We are going to be specifically talking today, the whole coming soon listing agreement time frame. I don't even know what you would title this contracts class other than how to navigate the rules that have been given to us. That's what we'll title it that. So typically I say, what questions do you have? However, I've got a multitude of questions that have been asked. So I'm going to try to cover as many of them as possible. And then of course, at the end or during it at any time, if you have any questions, let me know. But we're just basically going to jump on into this. And just for everyone's situational awareness, we're focusing solely on the timeline, legalities, how we handle different situations from basically when we have a seller agree to list with us to when we actually market the property and or go under contract. We're going to talk about all the different ways to do that. So as always, I'm going to jump right into the contract. I'm jumping onto Form 220, which give me a thumbs up if you can see Form 220, the listing agreement. Awesome. Okay, so here's what the listing agreement looks like. This is all covered in Section 13 of the listing agreement, which is where we're going to spend most of our time today. Now, I'm going to start this with basically a traditional, here's what normally happens when you take a listing. It goes on the market. You have your listing agreement filled out. Jump back to the beginning really quickly. Let's just say today's the day. You've met with them. They want to go on the market September 1. You're good to go. You basically said, hey, for the time period beginning on September 1 and ending at the end of the year, that's where you would put all of this. That's a pretty easy one, right? Then you would fill out the rest of the listing agreement as you normally would until you get down to Section 13. Now in Section 13, this gives you the two options that you have as it relates to the multiple listing service and public marketing. Option 1 is the one that we will check 95% of the time. Option 1 is basically a traditional listing that says, hey, you're going to list my property. You're going to market my property to everyone that could possibly see it in your power. We're going to get buyers to come look at the property. We're going to have negotiations on the property. We're going to put the property under contract, go to contract to close on it. Everyone's going to be happy. That's pretty much where everyone is right now. The old rule, as of up until about a week ago, was when they chose option 1, at that point, you could wait as long as you wanted before you actually put it into the MLS, unless you did any sort of public marketing, which is addressed specifically here in option 1. It says it will go into the listing agreement. The broker, where it is here, it says owner further permits other real estate firms who belong to any listing service as a member to advertise a listing on the internet in accordance with the listing service. That's not what I was going for in this one. I was actually going for the clear cooperation, which this is awkward because it is in here. Exchange, MLS marketing, advertising purposes only. Broker and owner, it's in bold, that's why I couldn't see it. Broker and owner agree to abide by the rules and regulations of the multiple listing service as it was provided in which the property is listed. So what our multiple listing service did was default to NAR, which was the clear cooperation, which said, hey, we don't have the rules that say it has to be in the MLS at any certain period of time. But if you publicly market it, we have to follow clear cooperation from NAR, which basically says from the moment you publicly market the property, which we'll go into what that means here shortly, you have 1 business day to get it into the MLS. Okay, so that's where it was before. That rule still stays. If you take a listing and you publicly market it, you have to have it in the MLS within 1 business day. There were 2 changes that were made that affect specifically option 1. Number 1 is you now have 7 days from when you take the listing that you have to get it into the MLS, right? Not active, but into the MLS, right? So when you take the listing, you fill out the form, and let's say we go back to the example, you put September 1 up here. You don't have to put September 1. You can put whatever date here, However, if you put September 1 here, then you have until September 8th to get it into the MLS, right? So you now have a set time frame from when you take the listing to when it actually has to go into the MLS, regardless of whether or not you publicly market it. If during that 7 days you do publicly market it, then you have to have it actually go into the MLS right away, or not right away, but within 1 business day. So for that example, you take the listing, you have September 1 as your listing date. And then this weekend, you're out and about and you're driving by the house and you stop to see the owner and the owner's talking to you. And then someone drives by and say, hey, is this house for sale? You say, yes, you've now publicly marketed it. Or the owner sends out a blast on their Facebook neighborhood page. It's now been publicly marketed. At that point, you have to have it by the end of the day on Monday in the MLS. Actually, technically this weekend will be the end of the day on Tuesday because it's the end of the following business day. That does not mean it has to be active for showings. It just has to go into the MLS. Okay. Everybody with me so far on this first, from when you start the listing agreement until when it goes in the MLS?
I have a question.
Yes.
So when they sign the agreement, the date that you put in, like I just had one that I recently listed and sold, but they wanted to wait several weeks to get things done in the home. So in that case, had this rule not been in place, I would change the date that I put in there. So I know for a fact they weren't even going to be ready. I wasn't doing any marketing. So say they signed it on the 1st, I would put a different date. So it wouldn't start accruing because I knew she wasn't going to be ready to list or get pictures done for a few weeks.
Correct. Okay, so let's pause and go back really quickly. So when I say effective, it's basically you have it from when the start of a valid listing agreement. So the day they signed is not the start of the valid listing agreement. The start of the valid listing agreement is the date that is right here on page 1 where it says for the period of time beginning on blank. So in Cheryl's example, let's say she meets with someone, it's a second home, they're going back to New York until the end of September. They don't want to list it until October 1. You can, at this point, put October 1 on here.
Okay.
You do not have a valid listing until October 1, though. So a couple things to keep in mind in the technicalities as it relates to the South Carolina law. During that time frame, you can't advertise it to anyone because you don't have a valid listing agreement. All right. So keep that in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is you are not protected. So let's say between now and October 1st, they've got this signed, they want to come back, and Delisha comes in and says, hey, I actually know of a buyer that can buy it now. If you'll list it with me, we put it on the market right away and close on the house. She's full within her right to do that. Obviously, Delisha wouldn't do that. Look at her. She's too sweet for that, of course. However, you're just not protected because your valid listing agreement does not start until October 1.
Okay.
So we will come back to how to protect yourself in that situation here in a second.
Okay, so
Thank you.
Camille.
So you said it has to be an MLS. It doesn't have to be active, so it's coming soon.
Correct. So what happens is the MLS has now added a coming soon module, or coming soon status, I should say.
Yeah.
So once you hit that 7-day mark after your listing is valid, right? Or once the 1 day after public marketing, right? There's 2 things that'll trigger it going in there. So it's either 7 days from when you sign it or 1 day from when you public market it, whatever one comes first. Okay. Now you can choose to go in right away, not having done either one of, well, you have to have a listing agreement. But let's say you sign it, for September 1, and then this weekend they end up putting it on the market early. That's fine, right? As long as you have the listing agreement, you can put it in the MLS. So correct, Camille, you have 2 things that'll trigger it. 1 is the listing agreement. 2 is public marketing. Then you go into the MLS. You have 7 days to have it in the MLS as coming soon, right? Now, coming soon does not syndicate. It does not go out. It is just like having basically a brokerage exclusive, except the local MLS agents will be able to see it. You're not required to have pictures. You're not required to have anything in it other than the required fields to hit submit in the MLS under that status. It is simply to go in there to let the agents know that it's on the market that are outside of Keller Williams. During that time, you cannot show the property. Okay. And then after the 7 days of coming soon or sooner, you don't have to wait 7 days. You don't even have to use coming soon, right? But then after you move from coming soon, within 7 days, you have to go to active status. At that point, it's just like putting an active listing in the MLS. everything goes out, everything gets syndicated, it goes out to the general population at that point. Delisha.
So if I got a listing agreement signed yesterday with yesterday's date, pictures aren't being taken until the 10th, do I simply need to get the listing agreement back to my seller and update the dates? And if MLS sees that the seller's disclosure was dated longer than this allotted time frame prior to it being listed, are they going to be policing that, or do I need to completely update all the dates?
No, great question. So a couple things on that. One, so let's say your first one. So your first one, you signed it yesterday, so August 29th, and they want it to go in on September 10th, correct?
Pictures are being taken the 10th, probably won't go in until like the 13th.
Okay, so then you'll want to amend your contract, because as your listing agreement stands, you'll have to have it in the MLS by the 5th. Right now, you can still put it in the MLS on the 5th. It's coming soon. And keep in mind, once you have it in, it's coming soon, you can publicly market it. You can put it on Facebook. You can let everyone know about it for those 7 days. This is your situation, is what the coming soon was designed for, kind of. It was designed to help. In this situation, you now have 7 days from the 29th till September 6th or September 5th, whatever it is, you know what I mean, 7 days, right? Then you put it in the MLS at that point, even if the property's not ready, because you won't have any showings until another 7 days when you move it to active or sooner. So in your case, you technically would not have to change anything. You would just put it into the MLS as coming soon on the 5th. And then when you have everything updated and ready to go, you would move it to active. That would have to be within 7 days, though, of it being coming soon. To your question about the property disclosure, separate discussion. You would not need to update the dates of the property disclosure. Not separate discussion, separate situation. If they filled those out on Sunday, that's totally fine. You don't need to change those.
Cool.
Nancy mentioned even if the seller markets it, yes. So the seller is signing it. Keep in mind, go back to the listing agreement, which is the part that the reason I highlighted the part that I did. If you look at paragraph 13, it says the broker and owner agree to abide by all rules and regulations of the multiple listing service on which the property is listed. Okay, so keep in mind that by signing this isn't just a rule that they're following because you follow, they're agreeing to follow.
Right now, it seems like 50.
All right, other questions about this? Yes, Celeste.
So I have one that I actually listed as coming soon, and we will end up going live on this Wednesday. There
Okay.
are some repairs still being done in the house, and my photographer is conveniently stuck out of town. So I was just going to go snap a few photos and put in the MLS that, you know, there may be some repairs still be going on, work around them, you know, in looking at the property. Is that okay?
Why would you do that versus just leaving it and coming soon for 7 days?
Well, because
no
our 7
showings.
days is going to be up on Wednesday.
Okay, great clarification.
Everything that could have went wrong has, and everything has taken like 48 hours longer than it should.
All right, so what is this is a great question because this will help clarify. This is why this is so confusing. Not you, like this is a great example of why this is so confusing. So what is the date of your listing agreement starting?
My listing agreement started on the 18th, August
Okay.
18th. And
All right,
so go ahead.
So you have 7 days from the 18th to get it into the MLS.
Which I did on the 25th.
Got it. So you've already put it into the MLS. Okay, got it. So if it is not ready to go active, then you would have to take it temporarily off the market.
Can I do that?
You can.
And would I have to redo the listing agreement at that point?
No. In this situation, you wouldn't. This is very situationally specific. I would not advise moving to active if the house is not ready to be shown.
Okay. Yeah, it's not.
Because once it goes active, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? It goes out. Everyone knows about it. So I would advise taking it temporarily off the market, just putting in agent notes, hey, some additional work was needed to get the house show ready. And
Okay.
leave it.
So that's good. And then another kind of random question. So I had one that was listed. We listed back in June. The sellers had a few things going on and they wanted to temporarily take the house off the market while they get married and while they move out of state. And then we'll put it back on the market. My listing agreement runs through December 31st.
Mm-hmm.
Do I still have an active agreement? Does what's currently going on affect that at all?
No. So this is a good example of why temporary off the market is such an important thing to recognize. Is temporarily off the market states by MLS rules says I'm removing my home from the market, from the MLS, yet I still have an active listing agreement. So by the way, for those of you heavy prospectors, you should not be calling temporarily off the market. You're directly violating the rules. That's what it's supposed to say. Now, if it expires, if they want to cancel their listing agreement, that's a totally different story. This is the example that they said, kind of the third part of the rules that they released that said, should you go to active and then you need to withhold showings for any more than 7 days, then you'd have to move it to temporarily off the market. Now, not to confuse the situation, but let's just take yours a little further. Let's say let's say this one was active, and this maybe had been the case. Life got busy. They wanted to take it off the market because they had, let's just say they had this weekend, they had their wedding and they just wanted it off the market for the wedding. You could hold it and you could withhold showings for the weekend and remain active and just withhold showings. However, the new rule states if you're going to withhold showings after it goes active for more than 7 days, then you have to move it as temporarily off the market.
So in the first situation where I have the, where it's listed as coming soon, and it will go active this Wednesday, can I have an additional window to hold showings, or it has to start on Wednesday?
I wouldn't, because same thing applies. Just because you're withholding showings, when you go active, you're going to full syndication and all the information goes out.
Okay.
I wouldn't from a strategic standpoint.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right. Other questions? Let's see. Sean, so does the coming soon status meet the 7-day rule? So the coming soon status and the 7-day rule are two completely separate things. So if you have 7 days from when your valid listing agreement starts to getting it into the MLS. Getting it into the MLS can either be as coming soon or active, right? So you have your first 7 days is valid listing agreement beginning, MLS. You then have an option once you go in the MLS to use an additional 7 days to have no showings, which is the coming soon status. Should you decide to exercise that additional 7 days, you technically have 2 weeks from beginning of your listing agreement to being active in the MLS. The only thing that would change that is in that first 7 days before you go into the MLS, if you publicly market it. If you publicly market it, then you have to be in the MLS within 1 business day, and that status that you go in can be coming soon. Does the public have access to coming soon? Does the public have access to coming soon, or just agents? Just agents. Just agents. All right, so everybody with me so far on just your traditional run-of-the-mill, taking a listing, need a couple days to get it ready, need a couple of days to get in there, my 2 options, everything I have as it relates to the MLS. All right, so let's move to the second part, which is a part we have not spoken a lot of because personally I don't love them. I don't love it. However, it is a good option for the situations such as what Cheryl brought up earlier, or like currently what has happened is we are letting people know, like, right, what we've been doing right now is we haven't been publicly marketing it. We've been letting other Keller Williams agents know about it just for informational purposes. Hey, bring your buyer when they're ready. Well, as the market got more competitive, what was happening is other agents were seeing it and saying, hey, I've got a buyer that wants to see it now. Technically, if that's the case, in order for them to do so, you would have to use what is the brokerage exclusive option. The brokerage exclusive option causes a little more work by the tune of one page. So take a deep breath, 1 page, and then 1 additional email, right? That's all you have to do extra, yet it covers a lot of issues that we are seeing right now. Okay. So I'm gonna jump back into the contract, and Katie, I see your question. I'll jump back to that. So if you go back into the contract right now, option two is what is called the brokerage exclusive. Okay. Seller does not consent for the property to be placed in the MLS listing service and instead wishes to have their property listed as a brokerage exclusive. This will prohibit the seller and broker from conducting any public marketing, which includes, and they always add, but is not limited to, site signage, social media, and any communication, oral, written, or electronic, that can be disseminated to the general public. All right, pause for a second. Seller and broker. Okay. The reason I highlight this, and again, remember, not been to one of my classes, when I stop screen sharing and we go back to the camera, this is like important message, right? So this means I'm being serious, game face on. I hear a lot of people that say, well, my seller is not going to do something just because your rules for the MLS say they're not going to do it. Okay, maybe. Yet 9 times out of 10, when they've signed this, they have actually agreed to abide by the rules. So just want to keep that in mind. When you go through your listing agreement, you explain to them that by signing this, they are agreeing to the rules that are in here. So you just want to keep that in mind, because this specifically states that if they go for brokerage exclusive, or they go to the one before where it says owner agree, they will not conduct any public marketing. Okay. Let's see here. This then says this will restrict the marketing of the property to only members of the brokerage firm. Broker and owner agree to complete any paperwork required by the multiple listing service, and verify the property will not be publicly marketed. All right. So this is basically what we've been doing up until this point as a company, right? We had whatever time we wanted to put it in MLS. We couldn't publicly market it. We were letting, however, our agents within the firm know. However, what started to happen is then those agents started to have buyers that wanted to see it. So this would be the option you would want. So let's go to Cheryl's example. If I've got a client that is not going to have their home come on the market for another 30 days, I'm going to list it initially as a brokerage exclusive. And then when I want to go into the MLS, I'm going to move it to option 1 to go into the MLS. Here's why. A couple reasons. One, I now have an active listing agreement starting today, right? As long as it's signed today. I have an active listing agreement that's a brokerage exclusive starting today. I can do whatever I want with it internally. I still cannot publicly market it. If I publicly market it, it's going to trigger the clear cooperation. So it's kind of the same thing, but it still allows you to have a protected listing agreement during this prep time. And it allows you, let's say I posted in Facebook, I've just got this listing, I posted in the Keller Williams Facebook, the local one, and Celeste comes in and says, great, that's awesome, I have a buyer here. Celeste and I can facilitate that buyer coming and seeing the property, and that is not considered public marketing as long as that buyer is represented by Celeste. Okay, so it's an exclusive brokerage listing.
So only within your broker, not an outside brokerage, not with like agent owned, only within Keller Williams.
Only within Keller Williams, and this would be Keller Williams with at which I'm the broker in charge. So this would be the Isle of Palms, Mount Pleasant, West Ashley, Chucktown Homes, and Key, right? So that's why we have the Greater Charleston Network, is to let everyone know, and in the event. So for instance, we just had this with 2 agents, actually, that just happened to both be in the Mount Pleasant office. They had a buyer. The agent came to the listing agent and said, hey, we have a buyer. Well, in order for that buyer to know about it and it not be quote unquote public marketing, the seller would have to have signed this option 2 that says only the people that are represented by Keller Williams are seeing it now. And then they can do it. Now, if that buyer doesn't end up purchasing the property, that's fine. You still have a brokerage exclusive until you're ready to switch your listing agreement to go to be in the MLS. Okay. Now,
And then
go ahead.
Just change it to option 1 and have them initial it once it goes live.
Yes. And now here's the very important part. And this is the part, if we start doing this, I'm telling you this, right or wrong, this is being heavily monitored, not necessarily by the people who should heavily monitor it. However, it's being monitored. Okay. Charleston Realtors page. Anyway, so what you want to do is make sure the second part of this step is it says broker and owner agree to complete any paperwork required by the multiple listing service. Enter the exclusive brokerage addendum, office exclusive addendum, that then needs to be filled out and sent to the MLS. And I'll email this out to everyone, but for you to look at. Basically what this is, I need to share it with you. What this is a giant cover your behind, right? Because Here's what a brokerage exclusive, just give you a little history because I know you guys love history and you have nothing better to do with your time on a Monday afternoon. A little history on the brokerage exclusive is this used to be a big thing, right? People would list and they'd have a brokerage exclusive. They would pay better splits, better caps if you sold your property in-house. It was a huge thing that was done by traditional companies for years. No judgment. In my opinion, no, it's a terrible idea and not in any way, shape, or form good representation for the seller. Because it's really hard to say the best interest of the seller, with few exceptions, is only for one small group of agents to see it when really 7,000 plus agents should see it, as well as every buyer out there, represented or not. So what the MLS did was say, okay, we'll allow the ability to do this, but we want to make sure it's being properly disclosed to the seller, the risk. So what happened is we now have this addendum, which basically says you have an office exclusive and you need to fill out this addendum. This is our required paperwork on the local level if we're going to have an office exclusive. Okay. It's basically to disclose all of the issues that are not going to happen if you opt out of the going into the MLS. Now, keep in mind, 9 times out of 10, this isn't going to be a big deal to any of your clients because you're only doing this for a temporary period of time. This for our clients actually helps because during that time, we weren't really allowed to show it to anyone. Now it allows us to show it to Keller Williams clients. Okay. What this does is it basically says, here's the agreement between the seller, or basically the seller says they have an effective date of their listing agreement and an ending date of their listing agreement, which will match what you have in your listing agreement. It'll say they acknowledge that the broker and listing agent participated in the Charleston Regional MLS and are subject to the MLS rules and policies. You can then instruct the broker, you are instructed not to disseminate the seller's property listing via the MLS and other brokerages until one of the two, or it should be an office exclusive until one of the two. This, which is basically the end date at which time the seller authorizes the broker and listing agent to submit the seller's property listed to the MLS for dissemination, or for the entirety of the listing agreement. This is our coverage that we had before, basically, that said we don't have to put this into the MLS until X date. This does not cover you for public marketing. I want to be very, very clear. This does not override the public marketing. This basically says I have a valid listing agreement in place, protected. People cannot go behind the sign, so to speak, even though there isn't one. But this says until this date, it will not be disseminated. Now, I will tell you, Camille, I see your hand, and I'll come back to a couple two people to go back to. I will say on this one, because this one I do have to sign as well, I will probably shoot you an email or pick up the phone if I see the one that says for the entirety of the listing agreement. I don't believe that we are in any type of market where it's in the the seller's best interest to only have it listed with Keller Williams and only be seen by Keller Williams clients. That's a broad brush. I'm not saying that's an absolute no. I would just want to know more about that. Let's see, Katie, Susan, can you email your clients directly from MLS coming soon options? It is my understanding, yes. Which kind of defeats what Delisha said, but you can send it to them. It does not syndicate. Camille, you had a question? You're muted.
So, Joseph, we will option 1 first, right? Suppose we will option 1 first,
Yes.
and we want to move into option 2.
Okay.
Right. So we do the 1-page initial and the addendum. What protects us from someone else, those other agents out there, from calling the seller to solicit that listing? I missed something somewhere. I can't hear. You're muted.
So walk me through that again. You're currently at option 1.
Right.
So you're active in the MLS?
Yes. And then
Okay.
you're going to go into option 2.
Okay.
Right. And so we do all our paperwork. We have the addendum and all that stuff. So it comes off of the MLS. What is protecting us from the public from soliciting the sellers to get their listing?
Okay. So I guess my first question would be, why would you do that? What is the situation that would require you to do that?
To take it from option 1 to option 2?
Yeah. Like if you're already active on the market, why would you want to go to option 2?
Okay, didn't think about it that far. I was just thinking
Yeah,
of
yeah.
protection of
Yeah, so
list.
in that case, if that were so what may happen is kind of the case where you go back to, let's just say, let's give Celeste's example where, life happens. They don't want it to be shown for a while. They take it temporarily off the market. You would just move it to temporarily off the market. You wouldn't need to change anything about your listing agreement.
Okay.
Which
Thank
is,
you.
by the way, a glaring example. Well, never mind. This is recorded.
Okay.
Just one of the many hiccups in what was meant to be. The motives were pure on all of these rules, but that's a good example of why it kind of contradicts itself.
Okay. Thank
But
you.
we're going to play nicely in the rules.
Okay.
That's what we do. Culture.
Okay.
All right. Other questions on that? Yes, Celeste.
So just for clarification, I usually have folks sign listing agreements well before 7 days of going on the market. So should I just, in that instance, while they're staging and painting and doing all of that stuff and decluttering, should I just default to option 2 and then have them go back and read? I mean, would that be a good way to do that?
It would be, only for a couple of reasons. One, so succinct answer is yes. And the reason is twofold. One, you're not protected if you don't do that. And typically what will happen is they're doing staging, they're having all this work done. Neighbor comes by, people are driving by, open house across the street, whatever it may be, they come in, oh, well, we'll write the contract now, or list it with us because we've got, 472 different reasons why we're better than everyone else. Whatever, you're not protected. So if you use option 2, you're protected. They say, actually, we have a listing agreement. It's an exclusive brokerage agreement. If you have any questions about it, you can contact my agent. That sort of thing. Again, that rarely happens. This whole thing about, well, let me go back to that. So that's number one. And then number 2 is you then have the ability to market it to potential buyers listed by KW, right? And you can list it within KW's site, and you don't have to worry about whether, because kind of how it's been at this point, and a lot of people didn't realize this, is when you went to the KW, like if you emailed out to KW agents or whatever it may be, that was really for informational purposes only. If they were actually going to go tell a buyer and wanted a buyer to see it, we then were kind of towing on clear cooperation. Option 2 is what we would have to come up with, which is our exclusive brokerage. The reason that I say yes on this is because up until recently, I was just, I guess I'm an incredibly naive person, but for me, it was like, well, okay, yeah, the seller signed the listing agreement, doesn't start till October 1. They still sign the agreement, right? Of course, they're going to honor it. Well, they don't. I mean, I'm sure they would, yet anything could happen, and they technically don't have a contract until October. So that's kind of the big one on there. All right, so let's jump back into the addendum for the office exclusive. So in the office exclusive addendum, we talked about obviously when it's going to be withheld from the MLS. Again, more disclosure. Seller acknowledges that by selecting the use of office exclusive under the MLS policy, no public marketing of the property is permitted while it's listed in the office exclusive. This includes, it is not limited to, flyers, yard signs, digital marketing on public-facing websites. This is the seller acknowledges. Okay, so again, they posted on their Facebook page, and we're getting not we, but the MLS is getting reports of this. That's public marketing at that point. So just let them know. If they push back, just explain to them, if that's something that you want to do, we just have to change the timeline of our listing. We're just keeping the rule is set in place is to make sure that this is either fairly disseminated to all potential buyers. I'll come back to what that comment means in a second. Seller acknowledges that if the property is listed as publicly marketed, then it must be submitted to the Charleston MLS and disseminated in agents within 1 business day of public marketing. If the property is publicly marketed and not entered into the MLS, the listing agent is subject to a fine in accordance to section yada, yada, yada. They also acknowledge that a copy of this addendum is filed with the MLS locally, which we'll go over here in a second. Broker and listing agent acknowledge that they've advised the sellers of the benefits of marketing on the MLS, which really, again, doesn't really pertain to our situation because 9 times out of 10, this is a temporary phase that they'll be in and then move to the full phase. And then the broker and listing agent acknowledge that they will comply with the rules, regulations, which we've already talked about doing. Once this is filled out, signed by the seller, signed by you, signed by me, and then emailed to support@charlestonmls.com. Clear as mud, right? We'll go over this over and over. Couple things. One, for a lot of us, and I say us, this sounds like a bunch of hooey that we just have to jump through. I will admit I have maybe been cause for some of that mindset. I don't love how this was handled or how it was rolled out. What I do want to make sure that we're very clear on is the original intent and the heart of this entire thing with the clear cooperation was valid in that it was intended to prevent some disgusting fair housing violations that were happening across the country. So the intent of it was good. Now, one could argue you can't make more laws for people who are going to break laws anyway, because discrimination was always illegal. However, if you can do something to help correct a problem, if we're truly representing the clients, and we have this organization that helps us do that through SCR and NAR, that's what the intent of this was. The intent of this was not to limit what we do. The intent was to keep from steering, to keep from basically preventing showing properties to certain clients. I mean, if you ever want to be frustrated, just go to YouTube and type in fair housing violations on Long Island. This is where this all started, was this study of just some disgusting behavior. And so that was the intent of this. The intent of this was not to make our job harder. It has had some numerous frustrating unintended consequences. No one can argue that, right? Yet in the meantime, we're gonna follow the rules and play as we should. But the intent of it was to say, hey, we want to do everything possible to make sure we are not keeping buyers from seeing certain properties or keeping sellers from being seen by certain buyers. Like that was hands down what this originally came from, regardless of what everyone says, some big conspiracy by NAR, Carolina One or something like that. It wasn't anything like that. Like, it was no specific company driving this. This was, the NAR truly felt this was the right thing to do. And they're probably guessing there was another way to do it. So just want to be clear on that. It is what it is. These are the ways that we work around it. The MLS is worked tirelessly and had people yapping in their ear for hours on end about how to do this better. And some reason they still haven't kicked us out of the MLS. But they've worked very hard to help us work on this. So, questions? All right, in summary, you take a listing. You have a listing date that starts here, 7 days. You have to have it in the MLS if you use option 1. And then after it goes in the MLS, you have an option of being active right away for showings or an additional 7 days in the coming soon status, at which point it does need to move to active for showing. That's it in a nutshell. After you go to active, should you need to remove it from showings for any period of time longer than 7 days, then you would need to move it to temporarily off the market. If you have a listing that you want to have signed, sealed, delivered today, yet they do not want to go active for showings or be publicly marketed for a period of longer than 7 days, your option, 2 options. One is to post date your listing agreement, which means you don't have a valid listing agreement until that second date or that date. Or you could use the brokerage exclusive, which says, hey, you are exclusively listed with Keller Williams, me as your agent, still can't publicly market. However, we can show buyers that are listed by Keller Williams. And at whatever point we deem necessary, we can go into the MLS. Sound good? Delisha.
Okay, so if I start kind of pre-filling out on the upcoming listing, if I start auto-populating information, knowing that it's not going to go live until September 14th, are they going to monitor that as well? Wait, you're muted.
Still trying to figure this Zoom thing out. So if you're saying, like it's not going on, let's just say, for example, versus it's not supposed to go on until October 1st. You like post date or do exclusive, you could put it in there. No, they're not monitoring that.
Cool.
So like if you save it as a draft and you start filling it out now, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're totally fine. You do have to have those fields that are within the MLS, not the documents or anything, but the fields within the actual entry. The required ones will have to be completed to go to coming soon, though.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? I have read this backwards and forwards, upside down, since they announced it a month ago, or since I found out about it a month ago. And it's still got some things that get confusing and that sort of thing. So obviously one 42-minute video or class is not going to answer all of your questions. So when your questions come up and you don't want to go back through the video or don't have time to, shoot me an email, give me a call. we'll get through this. We'll get through it. Ironically, now that all the dust is settled on it, the market's slowing down a little bit. So a lot of this is going to become not as urgent. Okay. All right. Well, if you guys don't have any other questions, camping, it was fun when I made the switch. Oh yeah. And what's ironic, so Katie was just talking about how they've been in Canopy and they made the switch. So she's out of Charlotte. And what's ironic, and this has been pointed out to the people who love to hear from me on a daily basis, that any MLS that actually did these is now, or either started with a coming soon option or did any of this, are also now starting to rethink it and do other options. So nobody's doing it perfectly, right? Everybody's trying to adjust to the market and play. So, all right, everyone, have a great afternoon. Let me know if you need anything.
Thank you so much.
Bye.